The town seemed to have forgotten that Thomas even existed. The newspapers were writing about another fire in the neighborhood, the police were closing the case due to lack of evidence, the neighbors were silent, as if they had conspired. But the silence was so oppressive that Jessie could feel it even in her own room, when she sat at night opposite the empty chair and found herself waiting. At any moment he would come in, take off his jacket, throw the old recorder on the table and say, "Well, Jess, are you still awake?" But days passed, weeks passed, and his voice remained only in memories. One evening, when she was going through his things, because Thomas's mother did not have the strength to do so, her hand came across the pocket of his old gray jacket. There was something inside. Jessie pulled out a small black recorder with a scratched case and a dim red indicator that no longer glowed. Her heart trembled. She turned it on, and the silence of the room hissed. "If you can hear this, then I found Father's deal." They knew back then, these people, in the shadows. Thomas's voice was choppy, as if he was running, gasping for breath, and then the recording ended with the sounds of a struggle, footsteps, and a heavy blow. Jessie jerked her hand away, the recorder fell to the floor, but she immediately picked it up, pressed it to her chest, as if it were the only thing left of him alive. Her head pounded. Father's deal, people in the shadows. What did this mean? Why had he never told her the whole story? And most importantly, why had it all ended this way? She couldn't just leave it all in silence. The next morning Jessie set off for the very house where Thomas had seen his last moments. Each of her steps echoed too loudly on the empty street. As she got closer, she saw that the house no longer looked abandoned. A new lock gleamed on the door, heavy black curtains hung over the windows, as if someone lived there now, hiding every movement from prying eyes. Jessie froze when she noticed a small envelope on the stairs, neatly placed as if it had been left just for her. She looked around. The street was empty, but in her chest she felt someone watching. The envelope was light, inside it was just a single sheet of paper with smooth block letters. What he was looking for, you will find too. But are you ready? Jessie's hand trembled. She looked around again, waiting for at least some movement, but the street remained silent. She put the envelope in her pocket, pressed her hand to her chest and whispered. "Thomas, what did you manage to open? And why are they waiting for me now?" Her voice was lost in the wind. In that moment she understood, the silence was not a void. It was a trap, waiting for someone to take the next step. Jessie had been up most of the night. The envelope lay on the table in front of her, like a living being waiting for her to open it again. She kept repeating the words in her head, what he was looking for, you will find. But are you ready? Ready? She didn't know. But one thing was clear, she was already in this game, and there was no turning back. In the morning, Jessie went to the university library, where Thomas sometimes spent hours searching through archives about his past. She remembered his words, there are things here that people want to forget for a long time. In an old catalogue, she found several newspapers from 20 years ago. The headlines told stories about a mysterious fire in the warehouse where Thomas's father had worked, about missing people whose names had mysteriously disappeared from police reports. They erased the past, Jessie whispered, turning over the yellowed pages. But the strangest thing was that Thomas's father's name was mentioned among the witnesses, but not as a victim or a suspect. Only as a person with information. As if he were the intermediary in something bigger. Late that evening, as Jessie walked home, her footsteps echoed in the narrow street. Suddenly, behind her, she heard other footsteps, heavy, even, too sure. She quickened her pace, her heart beating a rhythm like a drum. She looked back, a dark figure was following her, his hands in his pockets. The streetlights cast only fragments of light, and no facial features were visible. She turned into the alley, hoping to break away, but the footsteps also quickened. Then Jessie burst into the entrance of the old house and closed the door behind her. Breathing hard, she listened. The figure passed by. Silence enveloped her again, but this time it didn't seem empty, it was the silence of menace. At home, Jessie took out her recorder again and listened to the recording dozens of times. In one passage, which she had previously missed because of the noise, she could hear Thomas whispering softly. "If something happens, look for their sign, 3 circles." She wrote these words down and began to remember where she had seen something like them. And suddenly the memory struck her like lightning. On one of the sheets of paper in the library, in an article about that fire, in the corner there was a symbol drawn with 3 circles inscribed one inside the other. At the time, she hadn't paid attention to it, but now the sign seemed like a seal left on purpose. Jessie felt the room grow cold, as if someone else had entered through a closed window. She raised her head and saw, on the glass, fogged by her breath, the same sign was clearly outlined, 3 circles. She flinched, her heart jumping out of her chest. "They know I started looking," she whispered, feeling reality begin to break under the weight of invisible observation. And then she understood, there was no turning back. She had to move on, even if these shadows were already nearby. The night brought almost no sleep. Jessie lay there, clutching the recorder in her hand, thinking only of the sign with 3 circles. Why was it haunting her? And how did it relate to Thomas? When it dawned, she made a decision, to go to the library again, but this time, not just to study from the newspapers. There was one man there whom she remembered from the days when she had come there with Thomas. The senior librarian named Levko, gloomy, silent, with eyes that always seemed too watchful. Thomas once said jokingly, "He knows more here than the walls themselves." Now Jessie understood that this might not be a joke. The library was quiet. Levko was sitting at a table, in front of him a pile of cards and old catalogs. Jessie approached, placing in front of him a sheet of paper with the sign with 3 circles, which she had drawn from memory. "Have you ever seen this?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes remained focused. Levko looked up, and his face, usually stony, this time trembled. He took the sheet, slowly ran his finger over the symbol, as if afraid to touch it. "Where did you find this?" His voice was low and dry, like old paper. "Thomas left this, before he disappeared." A long pause. Silence seemed to constrict the room. Levko finally leaned closer to her. "This is the sign of the 3. He swallowed and looked around the space, checking to see if anyone was listening. "They have been around longer than you can imagine. Your friend interfered in their affairs. And if you saw this symbol, they already know about you." The words cut through the air, and Jessie felt a chill run down her spine. "What is the 3? She whispered. "People in the shadows. They do things no one should know about. Their sign is a warning. And if it appeared on your window, then you are the next one they are checking." Jessie wanted to ask more, but at that moment there was a rumble from the hallway. The library doors opened, and 2 men in dark cloaks walked between the shelves. Their faces were hidden in the shadows, but their movements were too confident. Levko grabbed the sheet and quickly whispered, "Go through the back door. Immediately." "And you?" Jessie's eyes screamed with fear. "I have been living in their shadow for a long time. They did not come for me." She hesitated only a second before rushing towards the narrow passage between the cabinets. Her heart was beating so loudly that it seemed that everyone could hear it. She jumped out through the old door and stopped, trying to catch her breath. Inside the library, a door slammed. Someone said sharply, "He knows something." Jessie understood. Now she was not just looking for the truth, now she herself was the target. In her pocket remained a sheet of paper with a sign, which Levko did not have time to take away. And his words echoed in her head, "They exist longer than you can imagine." She wanted to run away, to forget everything, but the recorder in her hands and Thomas's voice on the recording forced her to move forward. Because if she retreated, then everything he had done would truly disappear without a trace. Jessie walked home in short, jerky steps, constantly glancing over her shoulder. It seemed to her that dark figures were following her even in broad daylight. Levko's words were playing in her head, and the more she replayed them, the more she felt, Thomas knew much more than he was telling her. His silence was not cowardice, it was protection. She locked the door, drew the curtains tightly, and spread out everything she had on the table, the recorder, the sheet with the sign, old newspaper clippings. She listened to Thomas's recording over and over again, trying to catch the details that had previously slipped away. And then, at the very end, where the sound was almost imperceptible, she heard a soft scratching sound, as if he were writing something with a pen on paper. She found his personal notebook in the box. Most of the pages were blank, but on the last few she noticed the imprints of letters. Jessie lit a candle and carefully traced the pencil across the paper, and the words appeared as if Thomas himself were writing at that moment. 3 circles, look for them where the silence is louder than the screams. The girl shuddered. The phrase sounded like a riddle. She began to remember the places she had been with Thomas. And suddenly she remembered the old railway tunnel outside the city, closed and abandoned long ago. There was always a deafening silence there, so unnatural that every whisper echoed in her ears. Thomas liked to repeat that, even screams sound like whispers there. Deciding not to delay, she set off there in the evening. The tunnel greeted her with coldness and the smell of dampness. The light of the flashlight slid along the cracked walls, where graffiti was visible. Jessie's heart beat faster, because a few meters ahead she saw a symbol, 3 circles painted in black paint. She moved closer, touched the wall, and her fingers felt the scratches. The symbol was carved deep, not just painted on. "Thomas, you really left a mark on me," she whispered. Suddenly there was a rustling in the darkness. Jessie turned sharply, the flashlight snatching a silhouette from the darkness. The stranger stood silently, making no movement, but his presence was physically felt. "You're looking where it would be better not to look," a low voice said. "Do you know what happened to Thomas?" Jessie dared to take a step forward. "Thomas found something no one was supposed to find. Now his path is your path. But you can still stop." His words sounded almost like a warning, but a fire lit in Jessie's eyes. "I won't stop. If he left me this sign, then he believed I could continue." Silence fell again in the tunnel, and the man took a step back into the darkness. Before his face disappeared, he said, "Then get ready. Their truth always has a price." Jessie stood alone in the darkness, but she felt she was no longer alone in this game. The shadows began to move around her, and she felt reality tighten around her like a vice. And despite her fear, a stubborn determination was building inside her. Because if Thomas had left a plan, she had to carry it out. Jessie walked home in short, jerky steps, constantly glancing over her shoulder. It seemed to her that dark figures were following her even in broad daylight. Levko's words were playing in her head, and the more she replayed them, the more she felt, Thomas knew much more than he was telling her. His silence was not cowardice, it was protection. She locked the door, drew the curtains tightly, and spread out everything she had on the table, the recorder, the sheet with the sign, old newspaper clippings. She listened to Thomas's recording over and over again, trying to catch the details that had previously slipped away. And then, at the very end, where the sound was almost imperceptible, she heard a soft scratching sound, as if he were writing something with a pen on paper. She found his personal notebook in the box. Most of the pages were blank, but on the last few she noticed the imprints of letters. Jessie lit a candle and carefully traced the pencil across the paper, and the words appeared as if Thomas himself were writing at that moment. 3 circles, look for them where the silence is louder than the screams. The girl shuddered. The phrase sounded like a riddle. She began to remember the places she had been with Thomas. And suddenly she remembered the old railway tunnel outside the city, closed and abandoned long ago. There was always a deafening silence there, so unnatural that every whisper echoed in her ears. Thomas liked to repeat that, even screams sound like whispers there. Deciding not to delay, she set off there in the evening. The tunnel greeted her with coldness and the smell of dampness. The light of the flashlight slid along the cracked walls, where graffiti was visible. Jessie's heart beat faster, because a few meters ahead she saw a symbol, 3 circles painted in black paint. She moved closer, touched the wall, and her fingers felt the scratches. The symbol was carved deep, not just painted on. "Thomas, you really left a mark on me," she whispered. Suddenly there was a rustling in the darkness. Jessie turned sharply, the flashlight snatching a silhouette from the darkness. The stranger stood silently, making no movement, but his presence was physically felt. "You're looking where it would be better not to look," a low voice said. "Do you know what happened to Thomas?" Jessie dared to take a step forward. Jessie walked back from the tunnel as if she were walking on a knife edge. The stranger's words echoed in her head, "Their truth always has a price." She felt like all roads converged to one point, and there was no escape. Thomas believed that she could reach the end, and now that had become her only goal. At home, she laid everything out in front of her again, the recorder, the sheet of paper, the notebook, the newspaper clippings. She stared at these fragments as if at a mosaic that was supposed to fit into a picture. And then she saw, in several articles about the warehouse fire, next to the names of the missing people, the same initials always appeared. Not names, just 3 letters, in different orders. T.C. Oh, she stared at them for a long time and realized, these were not names. These were designations. 3. With trembling hands, she opened the recorder one last time. The recording ended with Thomas saying, "They found me," and then silence. And in that silence, she heard something she hadn't noticed before, a distant dripping of water, an echo, like the one in the tunnel. It meant he was there. And maybe his last steps still left a mark. Jessie returned to the tunnel the next night. The cold was bone-chilling, and the darkness seemed thicker than before. She went deeper than she had before, the light of her flashlight tearing new symbols from the walls, 3 circles, drawn one after the other. She felt herself approaching the center. And there, in the very heart of the tunnel, she saw a metal door. On it was the same symbol, but now carved so clearly that the door itself seemed to radiate cold. Jessie touched the handle. It was not locked. Beyond the door was a small room, lit by a dim lamp. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, maps. In the center was a table with a black folder on it. She opened it and saw lists of names, dates, phone numbers. Among them was Thomas's name. Opposite it was the word liquidated. Tears clouded her eyes. She ran her fingers over his name, as if trying to erase the sentence. And then she heard a soft creak behind her. She turned sharply, the same 2 men in cloaks were standing in the doorway. Their faces remained in shadow. "We warned you," one said. Jessie pressed the folder to her chest. "I won't stop. The world must know." "The world must not know anything," the other replied. "Because the world loves to live in illusion." They moved toward her. Jessie's heart was pounding, but Thomas's voice was in her head, "Don't give up." She took a step back, searching for a way out, but there was only a cold wall behind her. She gripped the folder tighter, realizing that this truth was hers now, but it could be the cause of her end. The last thing she felt was not fear, but determination. Because even if the shadows swallowed her, the memory of Thomas would not disappear. And maybe someday someone else would find this truth. The 2 men approached. The lamp flickered and went out. Silence fell again, louder than the screams.